Akhetaten's Gates, Chapter 26. As promised, Akhenaten kept a fine building program, and everyone began to settle into the new accommodations of the beautiful city. The end of his 7th year as king was fast approaching. Meridaten, at 6, held still a dominant place in the palace even above her younger aunt Akhetaten, but now they were beginning lessons to mold them into intelligent ladies of the court. It would be so one day. Akhetaten, at 3, was still a shy child, but with Meridaten occupied through the day, she was finally starting to come into her own. She loved this place. She loved it more than she loved Memphis, where she was born. As for Akhetaten, she had just celebrated her 1st birthday. Other great milestones of the city were that of a booming economy and fantastic artistic revelations. This was unlike anything that Egypt had ever seen before. My husband never tired of seeing the many portrayals of himself. He certainly had a pretty good sense of humor to tolerate the strange replications. I couldn't decide, really, if it was just a strange narcissism he had developed, or if perhaps he just found the abstractness that amusing. Nevertheless, it was a big change from the boy that I had first met. Hara had become a rather obscure favorite of the artists, one of many, who were slightly more public. As for somehow he too became a favorite of the court. Akhenaten seemed quite delighted with his, loyalty, unaware of the venomous words the man was capable of. Still, even I had to admit that certainly did his job well, commanding a flawless and impenetrable local army with Horemheb at his side. Needless to say, both of them lived very comfortable political lives. As for myself, I certainly gained quite a status. Yes, believe that even a queen can improve status. Usually, such an increase in favor was a result of the birth of a son. This was obviously not my case. I instead gained favor by playing the role of a priestess to Aten. This was an odd job for me, as I had no idea how to be a priestess. But really, Akhenaten felt I would be a natural, and simply being myself seemed to be all that was required. The idea behind such a role was of Akhenaten's design, of course. I was to satisfy the equal divinity with that of Akhenaten. Between you and me, I took great delight in my grand importance in the world of worship. To show just how much the royal family was intertwined with Aten and its divinity, Akhenaten even allowed Meridaten and Akhetaten to take part from time to time. No job went without job requirements. Okay, I said I had to be myself, but it wasn't really as simple as just that alone. Akhenaten was quite determined to make it very clear how important this was, and that I had to really look the part. He suggested that I always wear the transparent dress to worship in the temple. And it didn't end there. As if it weren't enough to have everybody staring at me through flimsy linen, Akhenaten insisted that I always keep the front of the dress open, exposing my whole front, breasts and all, to the world. As you can surely imagine, this did not go over well with me. How could any husband want his wife to be naked in front of the whole country? No way! But somehow, being as charming as he was, he pleaded and begged and was just, charming. He insisted that this was one of the most important symbolic things I could do for him and Aten. How did I let him talk me into these things? His explanation was that I was an earthen representation of the god Aten, as he, and that therefore we were to be the fertility symbols for a god that had no body, yet encompassed everything that seated the male and female spirit. He wanted the world to see my breasts, my belly drooping from motherhood, my hips wide from birth. I certainly didn't feel divine. Needless to say, I finally had to give in to his wishes. However, I always had a form of discontent for this requirement. I only went through it to please him, and to please Aten. I hope they appreciated it. But now that I think about it, why didn't he have to worship exposed? He got to stay dressed. But I made one thing very clear. I would most definitely draw the line at some barbaric ritual sex during worship. As for any other time, in private, I'd at least hear him out. But to think, me, Nefertiti, a fertility goddess. It must have been true. Had to be, for I became pregnant. Again. There were two ways to reach the great temple of Aten. The most common of these ways was the King's Bridge, taking us from the throne room through a small hall and onto the bridge. This was our private route to enter the temple. After all, the King's Road could be quite crowded with worshippers and subjects, hoping for the opportunity to catch a glimpse of him, or me. But it was a way he liked to travel from time to time, driving our own chariots in procession. Akhetaten always loved a parade. Often, on my way to the temple, before reaching the King's Bridge, just outside a side door of the throne room, I would pass a magnificent scene on the wall. This was by far, no matter how many reliefs or statues, regardless of accuracy, were made, no matter how many pictures painted, this was my favorite. This is the closest that I would ever come to a photograph or family portrait. So of course, it was dear to me. It was a large image of my husband and I on comfortable stools. In his arms, he awkwardly held Akhetaten, wishing to kiss her. So far, this was an accurate interpretation, if not abstract in style. Akhetaten always claimed her father's lap for herself. She was the dominant princess, after all. On my lap were her sisters. She seemed to show great interest in them, caressing her father's face and pointing at them. Akhetaten sat on the edge of my lap and jealously waited for a kiss herself. Akhetaten, on the other hand, quite literally I might add, was far too interested in trying to pull something from my trademark crown. She truly had grown to be a curious sort. I could only smile when I realized that one day her most popular word would be, "Why?" Our images were adorned with fine regalia, ribbons lifted in an imaginary breeze from our crowns. As for all of our images, Aten rests centered, floating peacefully above and between us. Its hands reached out tenderly to bless us, handing my husband and I the Ankh, a symbol of life. Yes, this was my favorite piece. It was painted by Hara, under the guidance of a veteran artist, Bach, currently head of Akhenaten's artistic revelation. This was a replica. A carved version of this was elsewhere in the city. These talented people, they had outdone themselves. I stood in the center of the King's Bridge. An outlet led to the large balcony, centered perfectly on the bridge. This was our window of appearance, for this is where he wished to appear before his masses. Akhetaten ripped a doll of hers from my hand and plopped on the ground in the shaded bridge, more eager to play in her own little world than make an appearance. I suppose it wouldn't have mattered. She was far shorter than the balcony's wall. Akhetaten stood obediently next to me, giving her little sister an odd stare before watching me and her father cautiously, awaiting some sort of indication of her purpose. The ground about our feet was littered with golden necklaces. They would soon be gone. That, after all, was why we were here. Out on the balcony of the window of appearance, Akhetaten was waving and greeting the forming crowd outside. Akhetaten was with him, bouncing on the balls of her feet and waving frantically to the people below. She was a true ham, that child. I chuckled as I came out to be with them, and looked them over briefly before looking over the crowd. Akhetaten squeezed herself between Akhetaten and myself. Below, the crowd arched to leave a space for the special individuals to stand. My father, I, was among them, as were the artists, Bach, Hara, and a few others. Some other soldiers, Horemheb among them. Even Tepi and Ramose were there. This was sort of like being blessed by a god. The favorites of the king were to gather here to have gifts thrown upon them, a symbol of their place of favor. The necklaces were thrown down to them, allowing them a fantastic workout of snatch and grab. It really didn't matter who got what, so long as everyone got some. There was no real method to the madness, so to speak. It was just a scrambled mess, reminding me of visions of maidens trampling on each other for a flying bouquet. Akhetaten and Akhetaten wanted to show everybody that they were big girls, important girls. They wanted to help, and help they did as they scooped up as many of the necklaces as they could and awkwardly dropped them over the balcony wall. As always, however, they began to quarrel over the necklaces. Luckily, before it could escalate to a point where it would explode beyond control, Akhenaten quickly turned on them to silence them and scold them silently, but effectively. They halted quickly. It would not do to misbehave in public, and worse, to make their father cross with them. He would not tolerate it. Before long, every golden necklace but two had been distributed to the blessed below. They had all become nestled about necks, wrists, and even around the heads. As for the remaining two, Meridaten and Mekhetaten decided to claim them for themselves. Satisfied with this, and hearing no objection to their decision, they rushed back into the palace, declaring themselves to be the most beautiful in the land. I sank back into the king's bridge to retrieve Akhetaten, who had been happily playing quietly with her doll. Now she was asleep on the floor with a doll in her arms. I smiled sweetly at her, with a soft chuckle, as I heard Akhenaten bidding his farewells to his subjects. "This day has turned out well," I said to him, bending down to scoop up my youngest daughter, who was none the wiser. He came beside me, placing a hand on the back of my head and kissing me passionately. "Indeed it has, Nefertiti. I wish I could spend the rest of it doing as I like. But alas." "Are you afraid of a grumpy pregnant lady?" I teased. "Of course not," he remarked, crossing his arms defiantly as he turned up his nose. "I'm downright terrified." "Terrified?" I gasped. "But why?" "An amazing transformation occurs within you," he said in a breathy voice, as he waved his arms about mystically. "When the seed is planted, it is like a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, a larva worm becoming a bee. You become a warrior when you become pregnant. Need I remind you of Mekadamose, the harem girl? Then there was me. I don't think you're really all that safe so long as you have a baby in there." As if to emphasize the point, he gave my belly a little poke. I couldn't slap him back, as I held the sleeping child in my arms. "How crude," I said, a giggle escaping. I was a little ticklish myself, after all. Well, a pregnant woman is also known to have a starving craving for intimacy. It can be seen as a sexual appetite, barely satiable, if you will, Akhenaten. I may just have to take advantage of you. That's the scary stuff I'm talking about. See? Now even my manhood is in danger. How am I to be positively sure that you will not snap it off in a moment of passionate fury?" "Oh, really? What an image, Akhenaten," I laughed. "Absolutely horrible. You should realize, my love, that if I break my toy, I will no longer be able to play with it." "Now who's the horrible one?" he teased. "Take Akhetaten to have more of a nap, and join me in the private inner sanctum of Aten's temple. I have something special for you to hear." "Something? Is this the something that you've been laboring over for months? Have you finally finished it?" "Yes," he smiled with great excitement. "I'm very pleased to have created a true masterpiece. Be quick to meet me, Nefertiti. I will burst if I cannot share with you my magnum opus. I want you and Aten to be the first to hear." I entered the temple, proceeding into the inner sanctum that was a private place for Akhenaten, alone with his priests and, of course, the princesses and myself if need be. This was a special place for Akhenaten to give great reverence to Aten in the name of himself and all of his people. Normally, a few priests would have been tending to him here and there as he led them along. But being as worship was over and other duties needed to be done within the temple, only my husband alone remained. "Akhenaten," I began in a teasing tone, "does this require a ritual mating?" "You do sound insatiable," he laughed. "Are you still on about that?" "My darling Nefertiti, you needn't worry. There is no sexual conduct of any sort that I shall ask of you. You can even keep your dress closed." "Hooray for me," I muttered sarcastically as I came alongside him. "You know, Akhenaten, I think you're missing a very important point." "Really?" He seemed confused. "What point would that be?" "Okay, see, I don't like being exposed to a million people. I don't mind being exposed to my husband when we are alone." "Oh, Point taken, and considered, and too bad, he replied with a teasing stare as he lifted his hands into the air in a worshipping fashion. You aren't even listening. I am. No, you're hearing, not listening. Are you going to yell at me, or are you going to let me do this? I grumbled and muttered as I imitated his stance, wishing I could just smack him around a few times to get my point across. But, being the stubborn man he was, it would have still been fruitless. I dedicate this work to you and Aten, he said happily. Then it better be good, or Aten and I will kick your ass. Nefertiti, he pouted. Don't pressure me like that. I was just joking, I laughed. Be swift. My arms are getting tired being held up like this. He considered me a moment before finally deciding that he could start. He cleared his throat loudly and then puffed out his chest as he took a deep breath and began. Glorious you rise on the horizon of heaven, O living Aten, creator of life. When you have risen on the eastern horizon, you will fill every land with your beauty. You are gorgeous, great, and radiant, high over every land. Your rays embrace all the lands that you have made. You are Ra, and so you reach their boundaries, limiting them for your beloved sun. Though you are far away, your rays are upon the earth. Though you are seen, your movement is not. When you set on the western horizon, the land is dark like death. Night is spent asleep, as in a bedroom with a covered head. One eye does not see the other. Should the possessions under their heads be stolen, no one would notice it. Every lion comes out from its den, and every serpent bites. Darkness descends, and the world is then hushed. It is because their maker rests on the horizon. The world is illuminated when you rise on the horizon, and shine as Aten in the day. You banish the darkness when you cast your rays. The two lands celebrate, lively and aroused, now that you have awakened them. With bodies cleansed and clothed, they raise their arms to adore your rising. Now the world begins to work. All the cattle graze on their fodder. Trees and plants thrive and grow. Birds fly up from their nests, their wings outstretched in the praise of your spirit. All the flocks gambol on their feet, and everything that flies and perches lives because you have arisen for them. Ships sail to the north and to the south, and the roads open at your rising. The fish in the river leap before you, for your rays reach even the middle of the sea. You make the seed grow in women, and create peoples from sperm. You feed the child of who lies in his mother's womb, and you comfort him to stop his tears. It is you that is the nurse within the womb, who gives breath to all that you have made. On the day of his birth, you open his mouth to make way for his needs. A chick within his egg chirps within the shell, and you give him breath and bestow life. When the time comes to break from his shell, he will come from the egg to proclaim his birth, walking for the first time on his legs. The things you do are many, although you are hidden from view. O God, that is unique beyond compare. You created the world as you desired alone, all people, all livestock, everything of which walks this earth, flies in the sky, and swims in the water. From the northernmost lands to the southernmost lands, and the land of Egypt, you have set every person in their place and supplied them with all they would need. All have their food and their allotted time of life. Tongues differ in their speech, and also characters and skins, for you have differentiated mankind. You created the Nile of the netherworld. You bring it forth to feed the people, since you made them for yourself, Lord of all, who graciously toils for them. Lord of all lands, Aten, who shines for all in the daytime, glowing bright with dignity. You make all distant lands live, For you have made a heavenly Nile come down for them, to make waves in the mountains like the sea, and to irrigate the fields of their towns. O Lord of eternity, how excellent your designs! A Nile from heaven for people of foreign lands, and all the creatures that would walk on this earth, and a Nile for Egypt coming from the netherworld. Your rays suckle every field. When you shine, they live and grow for you. You made the seasons to foster that for which you have made. Winter to cool them, and summer so that they may feel your warmth. You made a distant sky in which you might shine, and to see all that you have made. You are alone, shining as the living Aten, rising, dazzling, so far and yet so near. You have made many manifestations of yourself. Towns, villages, fields, roads, and waterways. Every eye sees you upon them, for you are Aten. You are my beloved. There is none other that knows you except for your son, Neferkeperure Wayanra, of whom you have made wise of your plans and your might. The creatures of this earth exist in your hands, as you have made them. When you rise, they live. When you set, they die. You yourself are the duration of life. It is by you that men live. Eyes may behold your beauty until you set in the west, and all work ceases. When you rise, you raise them up for your son, of whom came forth from your body, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, living in truth, the Lord of the two lands, Neferkeperure Wayanra, son of Ra, living in truth, Lord of the glorious appearings, Akhetaten, the long-lived. And as for the king's great wife, of whom he loves, the mistress of the two lands, Nefertiti, may she live and flourish forever and evermore. He lowered his hands and turned to me. I was in awe, unable to take my eyes off of him. He wrote it, that amazing piece of poetry, that breathtaking prayer. I could sense within a variety of moods. Heavenly Nile, mountains. Was he speaking of rain? His words were planned and placed so carefully, even down to describing scientific facts and logic. Could this great hymn to Aten be more than just lovely words? Was it a colorful layout to the very existence of the map of life? He was so aware that sunlight and solar energy was such an integral part of life. This was a part of him that I had never seen before. This passion, it overwhelmed and overflowed from me, bringing tears to my eyes. I wiped the tears, but I could not dry them so easily, and they continued to come and pour from me. I couldn't hold back any more, and I rushed to him in wild sobs, demanding wordlessly that he hold me close as I hid my face in his chest. I was so in love with him all over again. Perhaps even more so now. I couldn't even begin to imagine my world without him.